Well, good morning. Hold on. I think that my one camera is really fuzzy, so I'm going to clean it. Hold on. Nope, it's the sunshine. It's okay. Good morning, everyone. Coming to you live 15-minute Fridays, March 8th, across 3 devices. So I am live simultaneously on YouTube and on Instagram and on Facebook. So hello and good morning to everybody. Welcome. And a couple things that I want to chat with you about today. So the 3 things that I'm going to talk about today. So one is provincial advocacy. So the work that I do through Alberta municipalities from a provincial advocacy standpoint on behalf of Calgary and on all municipalities across the province. And so talking about the importance of that work. The second thing I want to talk about is Planning Commission. One, what is the role and function? And two, they reviewed the zoning reform proposals yesterday at Calgary Planning Commission. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And then that, of course, will segue us into the proposal that you may or may not have heard about that a couple of my colleagues have put forward with respect to a plebiscite. And I just want to walk through the pros and cons of that. As always, my goal as much as possible is to give you information and at times an opinion, but more than anything, information for you to also think about how you're thinking about things. So let's first dig into provincial advocacy and the work that I do there. So sort of by right, so by legislation and bylaws and all these things that sort of govern the work that we do, we send 2 representatives to Alberta municipalities as part of that form part of the main advocacy committee, so the board of Alberta Municipalities. Alberta Municipalities is the organization that represents all municipalities across the province with respect to advocacy to the provincial government on behalf of municipalities. And so we are part of that organization. So we send Councillor Winus and Councillor DeMong. So those are our 2 representatives. There are other subcommittees that do advocacy in specific areas. And I now am in my 2nd year of being on the Safe and Healthy Communities Committee. And so our work respectively focuses really on those things. So today we're talking about victim services, we're talking about EMS, we often talk about policing, mental health, housing, preventative social services. So sort of that falls under the bucket and the realm. And so the reason I put my hand up to be on that is 1, those are my interest and focus areas. And number 2, it really overlaps with a lot of the work that I'm doing both within the city and provincially as well. And so it's a really nice alignment to be able to be sort of cross-representing the city, but also other provincial advocacy. So family community support services is one of those examples. So I sit on FCSS as a representative of the city of Calgary. And because we often talk about FCSS through Alberta municipalities, that tie-in is really nice. And what it does is create sort of like the circle of information that stays consistent. So that's really, really important from an advocacy standpoint. It's also a great place to build relationships with my colleagues across the province. And committee compositions are different every year. And I apologize, I have a sneeze that is stuck in there, so it may come out. It does. So the provincial advocacy piece, I get to know my colleagues from around the province. We get to see likes and similarities. We get to share information and best practices, and building those strong relationships. Because the motto of Alberta municipalities is stronger together, and it's really, really true. Because even though Calgary is the largest municipality, we share so much in common with smaller municipalities, and vice versa. Smaller municipalities share a lot in common with us. They're also looking to us very often. But it's really important to be supportive of each other. And so this is why I sit on these provincial committees, is so that 1, I can learn and meet, and 2, bring the expertise and knowledge. So it goes both ways. And this is really important work. So one of the big things that we do as a city is advocate to the province for our needs, for the things that we need to help Calgarians be better, to help our programs and services be better. So stepping up to be on committees at the provincial level is a really, it's a privilege. It's an absolute privilege. But it's also really critical and important, because many of the things that Calgarians are asking for, we need support and help from the province. So housing is a really, really good example of that. So we talk often about housing at Safe and Healthy Communities up here in Edmonton. And I always say the bonus is I get to see family when I'm up here, so it's really great for me. So I love that. And so I am up in Edmonton this month twice. but usually at least once a month, if not twice a month for some of the committee work that I do. So there's that. Okay, I want to talk about Calgary Planning Commission and zoning reform. So Calgary Planning Commission. So Calgary Planning Commission is a joint committee between city administration, 2 councillors, and public members who apply to sit on that board. And they are it's a technical oversight body. So planning items come through them for technical oversight. So they review applications on their technical merits. And so yesterday, the zoning reform, so this is the citywide rezoning, which is designed to accomplish 3 things. And I'll go into that in a minute, what those 3 things are. Calgary Planning Commission is the technical oversight. So they're divesting themselves from the political narrative, and they're really looking at the functionality of a planning application or a land use on the ground in it from a technical sense. So that's the role and function of Planning Commission. So yesterday, Planning Commission reviewed the housing reform and the zoning reform. And they asked, and so I listened in to the live stream. The public can watch Calgary Planning Commission. It's an open meeting. So they review that and they ask some really, really good questions. And so when that link becomes available, we'll share that out with you. However, the report that Planning Commission saw is the same report that council will see. So it was a really great chance for council as well to get their eyes on it, and for the public to get their eyes on it. So we're going to share that report out. We've extracted some data from that report that I want people to see, because what I want people to know is, like, why are we proposing this? So outside of the housing strategy, or what are the data and metrics that were part of the housing strategy that is driving the recommendation for this change. And so I'm going to say this. My goal is to give information at this time. My goal is to give you information and for you to write in with your opinions. And those opinions can be all sorts of things. They can be a simple yes, no. They can be like, have you considered this? And I think what's really important in the context of the zoning reform, it's one of multiple actions in the housing strategy. It's not a make or break deal towards housing affordability or capitally affordable housing. It's really about a comprehensive suite, because the market doesn't act in silos. There are pressures, and Planning Commission does, and the administrative team actually talks about this a lot. So there's some great questions. We'll share the link out. We're going to share out some of the data and stats just so people, again, have sort of that background information and knowledge about why this is being proposed. So that's super important. So Planning Commission, technical review body, they asked some really, really great questions, and I really appreciated the breadth of questions that they asked, everything from like social and environmental impacts to citizen awareness and knowledge, to implications of it on the ground. Someone like even specifically asked about cul-de-sacs, and a lot of questions about, and this is something that is sort of coming up, is the whole idea between permitted and discretionary use. Now I'm going to go into row houses as permitted and discretionary use in another segment, because it's really, really critical and important. Because one of the things that we're hearing a lot is about the need for public input into housing. And so this is one of the mechanisms that administration is putting forward. And so I want to dig into that because it takes a little bit to break down and explain, because it's a lot of technical jargon, but it's actually a really critical and important piece of understanding planning legislation and planning bylaws and zoning. So I really want to be able to do a deep dive into that. And so I'm thinking I'm going to save that for next week. And then by then the video from Planning Commission will be up, and then you can go back and reference it, and we can link to it and all those other things. So I wanted to note that. Now I have a few minutes left. So I want to talk, you may or may not have heard about a plebiscite, or the proposal for a plebiscite that has been brought forward by 6 of my colleagues. And so I really just want to talk about the pros and the cons of a plebiscite. And a plebiscite versus a public hearing, because that's really what we're wrestling with. That's really what the question is about where and when do we hear from the public and who can participate? Because ultimately that's what it comes down to for me, is the participation factor. So a plebiscite is managed not by council, not by administration. It's actually jointly managed between Elections Calgary and Elections Alberta. And so the formulation of the question, the formulation of all of that comes at a whole other level. And that comes with a significant cost. And that's okay. Costs, I really actually want to take the costs out of this, because that's not actually, shouldn't actually be a factor. But it does add a whole other layer of complexity into the process. The questions that I'm going to be asking are actually about eligibility to vote, because I am almost 100% certain that the only people who are eligible to vote on a plebiscite are those who are eligible to vote. And that is exclusionary by nature right now. So the legislation as written is you have to be a Canadian citizen. But then I don't think that there's any, but then you also have to live in the city. And so it excludes a whole bunch of people. So it excludes people who are under 18, and housing affects people under 18. It excludes permanent residents, and there's lots of reasons people may retain permanent residence status for a long time or for a short time. It excludes new Canadians. So it's exclusionary by nature. And when we're actually talking about zoning reform, because zoning reform has been exclusionary by nature, and then we layer on a plebiscite where voting is exclusionary as well, we have to ask. So now public hearing, some will argue that public hearing isn't accessible to all because not everyone can come and present during the day. There are actually two critical components to public hearing. There is the ability to come and speak in person, but the other thing is to submit a letter, which is part of a public submission, which is part of then the public record. So the public record then is actually written comment. So it's not even a binary yes, no, perhaps. It is very much, it is sort of like, this is my story. This is my reason. And that's what I'm actually really interested in hearing. I'm less interested in the yes, no. I'm actually interested in hearing why people got to their yes, no. What are the pieces of information or the decision that is informing them towards a yes, no? And so in a public hearing, that is open to everybody. So whether you've been in Calgary for one day and you're looking for housing, you have the ability to do that, or whether you've been in Calgary for 10 years and you are a citizen and you are eligible to vote. So in that way, plebiscites versus public hearings, there are different levels of availability of participation at different levels, but a plebiscite is by nature exclusionary, just the way that the legislation is written. And I don't believe that we can change between now and October of 2025, change the legislation on who could then be eligible to vote in the plebiscite. So that's another layer. So it's not that we couldn't put forward that. I just don't think that we're going to be able to do that in time, because that requires a big change to provincial legislation. So there is that layer of it as well. And then the other thing is just around timing. So this is part of a housing strategy to address, and I am being very careful to not weaponize housing crisis. We have a drastic housing shortage, which, and again, we can argue on not whether it's a crisis, which is why I don't want to use that term. But we have a large number of people who are moving to our city. We know that the costs of housing have escalated both in the rental and the purchase market. This is a Friday 8 a.m. brain. So we know that costs have escalated. And so we are looking at all measures that can perhaps ease the housing shortage, because there is inevitably market pressures at supply and demand economics around the cost of goods. And in this case, the cost of good is housing. There are a lot of other factors that are complicated and nuanced around why rental prices are going up. And so it is multi-layered, which is why the housing strategy has 98 recommendations, because we know that one single thing isn't. So those are the pros and cons of a plebiscite. And that. Now, I am just going to note that there is one individual on Instagram who asked me to make a comment on all things related to policing. And I will not make a comment on that. We are not obligated or should legally be making a comment on that. And because that is the oversight body of police commissions, if you have concerns or complaints, those should go to police commission. I'm just going to note one really quick comment also that came on Instagram, that new RCG units are higher than the ones of the thing that gets torn down. Sometimes, yes. So if we actually look into the data, though, so if, let's say, an older home gets torn down, and older homes we know are not as efficient. They cost a ton of money to upkeep. And so while the initial value, so let's say it's like, we're going to use round numbers here, $500,000. I'm going into something, and we're going to dig into this a lot later. Let's say it costs $500,000 just to purchase. There may be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of like repairs and upgrades. And so let's say there's even, $50,000. You're actually now at the price of new, and you have a less efficient home. So yes, it is, but then also you're housing one family versus potentially more. So those are the trade-offs and benefits. Also, if that single family gets torn down and a new single gets built, the value of that new single, the average value of that is $1.6 million. The average value of a new row house is $568,000. So if we're comparing like for like new builds in established communities, $568,000 is way more affordable than $1.6 million. And arguably, you're right, it may not be as affordable as some other older units. Absolutely. But we have to look at it all comprehensively. We also have to say that when you only have a limited supply of something, and we have a limited supply of row housing, and we have a limited supply of developers, we have a limited supply of capital, the costs are going to be higher. When you introduce new players into the market, that will change the market economics as well. So anyways, I can't go on any further. I've been on here for 17 minutes, so past my 15. I hope you have a lovely Friday. We will link to the Planning Commission documents on we will definitely link to them on Facebook. I'll link to them on YouTube. Instagram's a little bit harder to link. So I'll get those up throughout the day, and the team will help me get those up throughout the day. And I hope you all have a great Friday, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks so much, everybody.